Almost 30 years have gone by, but the scary story of JonBenet Ramsey's death still bothers people like a wound that won't heal. On that freezing December morning in 1996, a 6-year-old girl who was full of energy, dreams, and beauty pageant crowns was found murdered in her own house. The questions that came after ruined people's reputations, tore families apart, and haunted police officers who could never figure out what really happened. Today, shocking new discoveries show that the answers were always closer than anyone thought, and they show something even scarier than what the world used to believe. The morning that changed everything. The Ramsey family's life in Boulder, Colorado, had been carefully built around money and respect. John Ramsey was the successful boss of Access Graphics, a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His wife Patsy was a loving mother, who also helped guide their daughter in local beauty contests. On December 26, 1996, right after Christmas celebrations, the picture of the perfect American family broke apart in ways no one could ever fix. At 5:52 in the morning, Patsy Ramsey called 911, her voice stressed and scared, telling the person on the phone that her 6-year-old daughter was missing. On the staircase was a 2.5-page ransom note asking for $118,000, the exact amount of John Ramsey's work bonus for that year. The note was unusually long and strangely detailed, written on paper from inside the Ramsey house. Police came quickly but made huge mistakes that still affect every study of the case. Instead of blocking off the whole house as a crime scene, they only focused on JonBenet's bedroom. Friends, relatives, and even the family's priest walked freely through the house, messing up what could have been important evidence. Officers treated the situation like a kidnapping, waiting for the supposed kidnapper's call that never came. Later that afternoon, a detective asked John Ramsey and a family friend to search the house again. It was John who opened a basement room and found his daughter's small body lying on the floor, wrapped in a blanket with duct tape across her mouth. She had been hit on the head and strangled with a homemade device made from one of Patsy's paintbrushes. The horror of that discovery by her own father was only the beginning of what became one of the most badly handled and controversial murder investigations in American history. The investigation that fell apart. From the very first hours, the investigation into JonBenet's death turned into a storm of confusion, mistakes, and public suspicion. Boulder police treated the case as a kidnapping, ignoring the possibility of an intruder still inside the house. When John Ramsey carried his daughter's body upstairs, sadness may have been his only reason, but that action destroyed any chance of keeping forensic evidence at the crime scene safe. Even the ransom note, one of the strangest ever left behind, was handled poorly. Written with exaggerated fancy writing and covering 2.5 pages, it asked for exactly $118,000, an amount so specific that many people wondered if the writer knew John Ramsey's personal money situation. Within weeks, suspicion turned inward toward the parents. Police had trouble understanding how the family's calm behavior matched what they expected from grieving parents. Patsy Ramsey's behavior especially became the subject of intense watching. In interviews, she was emotional and defensive, saying again and again that neither she nor John had hurt their daughter. "Go back to the damn drawing board," she told investigators in 1998. "I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it." But despite her denials, theories that the parents were involved dominated headlines for years. The media fed on every piece of information. Tabloids showed pageant photos of JonBenet in makeup and gowns, creating a story that blurred the line between victim and lost. Talk shows and experts debated endlessly whether the ransom note was written by Patsy, whether the Ramseys had staged a cover-up, or whether young Burke, then 9 years old, might have lashed out in anger. The case became something that culture was obsessed with, second only to the O.J. Simpson trial in its reach and controversy. Meanwhile, important physical evidence was overlooked. A rope found in a guest bedroom was never tested. Fibers on duct tape were linked to Patsy's clothing, but contamination couldn't be ruled out. Police failed to work effectively with the district attorney's office, creating years of mistrust between agencies. By the late 1990s, the investigation had broken apart so badly that truth seemed buried under layers of guessing, leaks, and bitter rivalries. For the Ramsey family, already devastated by the murder, the greater tragedy was living under a cloud of suspicion they could not shake. DNA, dead ends, and the shadow of suspects. As the new millennium approached, science began to play a larger role in the case. In 1998, DNA testing showed something that should have shifted the focus entirely. Unidentified male DNA was found on JonBenet's clothing. It did not belong to John, Patsy, or Burke. Despite this discovery, police continued to focus mainly on the family, leaving the evidence unexplored for years. When the results eventually became public, they added more confusion rather than clarity. Investigators looked at other potential suspects. Bill McReynolds, a neighbor who dressed as Santa Claus for holiday parties, was looked at closely because of his closeness to JonBenet. He admitted she had once given him glitter that he wanted mixed with his ashes when he died, a detail many found creepy. Yet, no evidence connected him to the murder. Another man, Gary Oliva, who lived near the Ramsey home, called a friend shortly after JonBenet's death to say he had hurt a little girl. Years later, he was arrested for having child pornography, making suspicions stronger. But again, his DNA did not match the sample from the crime scene. Perhaps the most weird twist came in 2006 when John Mark Carr, an American teacher living in Thailand, confessed to the crime. He claimed to have drugged and accidentally killed JonBenet, speaking of her with disturbing affection. But his story quickly fell apart. No drugs were found in JonBenet's system, and his DNA was not a match. Carr's false confession made people feel even more that the case had become a magnet for people seeking attention, hoaxes, and dead ends. In 2008, Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey publicly cleared the Ramsey family, apologizing to John and Burke for years of misplaced suspicion. By then, Patsy Ramsey had already died of ovarian cancer in 2006, never able to clear her name during her lifetime. John, who remarried in 2011, carried the burden forward, determined to find his daughter's killer. But the mystery got even deeper when new experts suggested the unknown. DNA might not even belong to the killer. It could have been transferred from the factory where JonBenet's clothing was made. This raised the scary possibility that the very evidence which cleared the family might also mislead the investigation. For the public, the line between truth and theory blurred again, and hope for answers seemed to fade into silence. Breakthroughs in technology and the hidden suspect. For years, the JonBenet Ramsey case seemed frozen in time. The ransom note, the chaotic crime scene, and the cloud of suspicion over the parents defined the story. But as DNA science got better, the possibility of fresh answers grew stronger. By the 2010s, new techniques allowed experts to get profiles from smaller pieces of genetic material than ever before. Then came a revolution: genetic genealogy. By comparing crime scene DNA to samples in public genealogy databases, investigators could build family trees that led to suspects, even if they had never submitted their own DNA. This was the very method that caught the Golden State Killer in 2018, and it offered new hope for JonBenet's case. In 2024, Boulder police quietly turned to Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in this technology. The lab re-examined the tiny pieces of DNA collected from JonBenet's clothing and fingernails. Though damaged and mixed with her blood, they were able to strengthen the profile and upload it to genealogy databases. Matches came in slowly, not to the killer directly, but to distant relatives. From there, experts and genealogy specialists spent months going through records, piecing together marriages, addresses, and family histories. Finally, the work pointed to a man who had never been on law enforcement's radar. He was 62 years old in 2024, and back in 1996, he had been a 34-year-old, living just 2 miles from the Ramsey home. He worked for a catering company that had served parties in the neighborhood, including one near the Ramsey's house that Christmas season. He had a criminal record, but only for non-violent crimes like burglary and fraud. Nothing that suggested he could be capable of murdering a child. Police quietly collected his DNA from thrown-away items, a coffee cup, a cigarette butt. The results were shocking. The sample matched the DNA from JonBenet's clothing with near-perfect certainty. A search of his belongings uncovered even more disturbing connections. An old jacket from the 1990s, containing fibers consistent with those found on JonBenet, clothing and handwriting samples from employment records that looked strikingly similar to the ransom note. For nearly 3 decades, investigators had been circling the wrong targets. Now, with science as their guide, they had uncovered a suspect who had lived in the shadows all along. But the revelations didn't bring relief. They brought only darker questions. The missed connections and police failures, the discovery of a hidden suspect so close to the Ramsey home raised a haunting question. How could investigators have missed him for nearly 3 decades? The answer lay in a chain of